Hi, I'm Leon Gorin, president of PEO Leadership, a peer-to-peer leadership advisory firm. We're an amazing community of CEOs, presidents, and senior executives. Ask yourself, are you learning as fast as the world is changing? It's time for Ontario business leaders to band together for counsel and support. It's time for you to tap into the business wisdom of our peer groups and unlock new ways to grow. I want you to come out of this COVID crisis a better leader and your organization ready for what's next. Take the first step at peo-leadership.com.
I'm going to kick it off, and as people join, they'll join. They'll jump in and join us. So, good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone this afternoon to our special PEO Leadership Live webcast with Adren O'Connor of the Connor Professional Group. For those of you joining us for the first time, a special welcome to you. Over the last 5 weeks, we at PEO Leadership have been working around the clock, helping our leaders lead during these unprecedented times. This support has included focusing on our 5 key areas of a leader's life that we believe need to work in harmony for any leader to succeed. These 5 areas include a focus on one's business, health, wealth, family, relationships, and career. And I sort of bring the family and relationships together. Our meetings and webcasts during this time have addressed working with diminished revenue, working remotely, cutting operational expenses, the where and the how, understanding what government support programs are available, managing and working with you to preserve your wealth, and really understand the impact the virus has had both on you and your employees and your family. These events have been extremely successful, and we owe it really to both the experts that have come forth and the questions, support, and contribution of the leaders that are participating, like all of you today. So at PEO Leadership, I'm proud to say we have some of Canada's strongest and generous leaders. So in today's session, we hope to focus our attention on you, your family, and those within your community. I've known Adren for a couple of years, and I've seen her present in my groups a few times, actually. It's been fantastic. Adren founded the O'Connor Professional Group to address the needs of families and individuals struggling with an array of behavioral health issues, including addiction, mental health disorders, eating disorders, learning, and other developmental challenges. Adren's a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Business School. She remains heavily involved in the community activities as a board member of Windsor School Corp, Collaboration for Family Flourishing, the Massachusetts Associate of Mental Health, and Attorneys for Family Health Enterprises. She's got incredible knowledge in this area. It's probably diverted a little bit. I don't think she expected, like any of us, that the coronavirus would hit her and her organization this way and the families that she deals with. But we're very excited to have you with us today. So before I just hand over to Adren, just a couple of things from a logistical perspective. I know there's going to be lots of questions here with Adren. Adren's going to go through her presentation. As you have questions, please post them in the group chat or raise your hand. Kelly and I will sort of be there trying to grab those questions. And we'll open Q&A on the completion of Adren's presentation this morning. Okay, Adren, it's all yours.
Thank you. And hi, everybody. I'm thrilled to be on the webcast today. I am calling in from Boston, where we are safe and sound in our homes for many weeks. And today we're going to talk about anxiety and COVID-19, frankly, because that's the topic that most of our clients and referral partners are worried about the most. What I will say is our firm, as Leon mentioned, deals with a range of behavioral health issues, from substance use to other mental health issues, autism, eating disorders. So if there's a question that you want to ask, you can certainly put that in the group chat for after the presentation. But if it's related to another mental health area, happy to try and address it. So forgive the way I start the presentation, but we use a lot of Gallows humor at O'Connor Professional Group because, frankly, we see a lot of families who are in really sad situations, and what we're trying to offer them is hope. So for those of you who can't read the cartoon, it has a gentleman coming outside a plane window that says, "I was your pilot, someone sneezed, good luck." And frankly, I think this has been the reaction. I say all the time, on the one hand, I'm on probably 3 to 4 hours of Zoom a day, which I imagine many of you are, and there's benefits of that. I've connected with friends, family, colleagues that I haven't seen in years. The downside is I think there's a bit of suspicion. I just went for a walk this morning with my parents, who I do see outside in the Boston area. And it's funny to watch the walking patterns of most people. As soon as you get close to them, everybody's diverting their various ways. So I think this cartoon sort of says it all in that regard. So I think what's been interesting for me as somebody who's in the mental health profession is to watch the human reaction to this virus. And in some ways we're seeing, and these are articles from when the virus was, I think when some of the restrictions were just starting to happen, at least locally here, you're seeing major companies giving back. You're seeing CEOs. There's a hospital here in the Massachusetts area where the CEO gave up his salary for a couple of months to avoid furloughs or layoffs. So you're seeing incredible acts of kindness and people coming together. I'm sure some of you have seen on the national news coverage, people coming out of their apartments and cheering on health workers and doctors. And then we will see the other end of the spectrum. My family owns a home in Long Island. In fact, my parents were thinking of kind of going there to shelter in place. And the article, as soon as they told me about this brilliant plan that my father had devised, I sent them the article on the left about people going into very high-end grocery stores and taking all the chicken and all the steak and all the fish and bringing it home to their freezers for nobody else to get. So we're certainly seeing various reactions to this virus in terms of the way people respond. And I would say it's not surprising to those of us in the mental health field. What we know is that uncertainty causes stress. So this is an electric shock study that shows most people reacting not necessarily with anxiety towards just the pain that they may endure, but the fact that they didn't know if it was going to happen. I didn't put this in this slide, but there's actually been some studies with children who grow up in homes with abuse. And what they've said is that folks who have parents who are consistently caring, obviously that's the best for mental health, and parents who are consistently neglectful or abusive, it's negative for mental health, but the most severe cases are those who don't know what to expect from their parents. On the one hand, they may be lovely, and then the next day they may come in and they may be hit, or they may be get a reaction from their parents that's negative. That actually causes the worst psychological impact for kids long term. So, one of the things I wanted to do, given that we're going to do an abbreviated presentation, I want lots of time for questions. And I'm somebody who, I always joke, I'm a plumber, not a philosopher. So I don't deal well in theory. I like to talk about solutions, which is sometimes beneficial and sometimes to my own detriment. But I think there is tons and tons of content out there in the world about ways to reduce anxiety. And some of this is stuff we already know. Basic things like getting adequate sleep, working with making sure that you have a mindfulness practice that deals with relaxation or engaging in positive, pleasurable activities, avoiding things like substance use, really high-risk behaviors, constant rumination, staying in touch with people and staying connected with people. And then also, eating well, exercise, those are also evidence-based ways to reduce anxiety. And what we tried to do here is suggest some resources. A few of them are actually from Massachusetts General Hospital, which was kind enough to put out a pretty lengthy document around ways to reduce anxiety among children, ways to deal with anxiety if you're a healthcare worker. So a lot of those resources are there. But we also try as a company to think through more creative ways to be resourceful in reducing anxiety. And I've put some of those resources in the addendum slides. I don't think we'll go through those on the call, but you're welcome to have them and Google and look through them to see if they're helpful. What I want to talk a little bit about is the paradigm. I'm not a clinician. I own the company and I have a bunch of therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists who work with me. But the way I think about anxiety in COVID-19 are sort of two paths. And one is folks who have what we call situational anxiety. And that would be based, if you are somebody who is normally pretty high functioning, normally not showing signs of anxiety, suddenly the world is turned upside down, your business, your family life, balancing homeschooling with domestic obligations, all of those things cause people to have heightened anxiety. And the reason it's called situational anxiety is because it's based on an actual situation. So we have a cadre of folks in our practice that are getting coaching for that. They're supposed to be they're in high performance positions. They're trying to perform at their businesses, but they're also very stressed. And likely, the likelihood is They may benefit from therapeutic help, perhaps some medication, some coaching for a period of time. And as things stabilize in the world, it's very likely they will go back to being as high functioning as they were before. Then there are folks, and this is sort of the bottom half of this slide, where anxiety is really disrupting their life. And these may be people who had an underlying issue. So people who are showing physical symptoms, shortness of breath, constant headaches, stomach issues, disruption of life activities. I think we want to put that in context. Many of us are not getting the sleep we hoped for, just given the obligations we have. But if you're somebody who is not able to sleep at all, and that's lasting for more than 2 to 3 weeks, it may be time to consider getting some type of professional help. I think one comment I also just want to make on this slide is that we are seeing actually, what's been very interesting is we are seeing clients who have anxiety issues, and frankly, they are enjoying this crisis. I don't mean enjoying in the sense that they are hoping for bad outcomes for folks, but they like the stay-at-home orders. They are enjoying the fact that they don't have to go into an office because they are folks who isolate in their homes. And frankly, the reason we were working with them in the first place was because they were struggling to get out and do positive activities. We have a client right now in New York City who lives in an apartment, has been somebody who has a journalism career. So she does most of her work online. And our major goal with her, if you can believe it, in the last 3 months was to get her to go to an opera performance that she actually loved and enjoyed and had a season ticket holder of. It took us months to get her to go with one of our coaches because she had such a fear of being in public, and she would constantly report medical symptoms that we questioned the veracity of. So if you think about that person in the context of the world we're living in today, she has probably a little bit of paranoia around her symptoms. She's somebody who enjoys isolating. So we are now in an era where she is at home and loving this. And frankly, the real work for her is going to be when she leaves the apartment and has to go back to life as it returns to normal. I think the other symptom we're seeing, and again, for those who can't read the cartoon, it's a doctor saying, good news, you don't have the coronavirus. And then the patient is saying, but you can still quarantine me from my kids. I don't know if any of you have seen it. There is a very funny short video on, I'm not a comic book fan, but it was with one of the Marvel characters, and a very dark voice says to him, you have 2 options. Option 1 is you remain quarantined with your kids and go through this virus. And before he even gets the chance to say option 2, the gentleman says, option 2. So we're seeing a lot of families many of whom, it's funny, again, similar to the anxiety analogy, some families who are enjoying time with small children at home have enough support internally in a support system where they can take advantage of some of this time of togetherness. We're seeing other families where this is really playing into probably underlying tensions that existed within a marriage. We're seeing families who are having grown children come into the home who were furloughed or who were at college. They're seeing patterns of behavior. Either they're ignoring the restrictions or they're drinking more than family members would like to see. And then we're seeing, parents who are both working and trying to balance homeschooling or cooking for their kids every day and keeping up with the domestic routine. So I think it's playing out in various ways amongst our clients. I think, broadly speaking, and these are questions I asked myself personally, and I will confess myself, I'm actually writing about this in our monthly newsletter. I personally, when they first started talking about the coronavirus, my parents were away in the Caribbean, and they talked about coming home, and I had a very negative reaction. I said, you're outdoors, you're freaking out about nothing, this is ridiculous. And I was really kind of cranky and angry as I was seeing reports of purported potential school closures and business closures. And finally, I sort of realized, what am I angry about? And I think it was some fear and some denial. And I stepped back and said, okay, somebody had asked me this a long time ago, a mentor, and I said, 2 years from now, how do I want to think about my behavior? Do I want to be proud of the way I reacted? Or do I want to think, gosh, I was cranky with my employees, cranky with my parents, all of which is understandable, but it's not going to leave the kind of impression that I want to long term. And then the second question for those on the phone that have families is sort of, are there things that you can gain from this experience? And whether that's times, this is a particularly positive picture of everybody on their bikes outside. But are there things that you can do together? We're doing a webinar, and I think it's next week. My colleague is on staying sequestered and sane, and she's going to talk about some ways that families can build better dynamics and what are things that can help to contribute to a better outcome during these uncertain times. So thank you and stay safe. That's the end of the content portion, and I'd love to open it up for questions if we can.
Thank you, Arden. That was great. So again, please feel free to ask any questions in the group chat there. I can either pull you out and you can ask the question yourself, or I can read the question. Arden, I'm going to start it off. The long-term impact. I know you guys are probably thinking, because you deal with a lot of situations with different mental health issues. As this goes on, and then the fact that people are now talking about continued social distancing will continue for quite a while. How do you see this playing out in society? Like,
it's a great question. We're anticipating a couple of things on the clinical end, and then I'm going to make some comments. And I'm going to caveat all this by saying I'm not a therapist personally. You know, I have a bunch on my team. I've been around the therapeutic space for many years. So take my opinions with a grain of salt. But what I'm anticipating based on the calls that we're getting as a company are a few things. One is I think we are going to see heightened levels, and there has been some media attention paid to this, of substance use. So folks who already struggled with substance use, who are now in their homes, who are really isolated and not engaging in the world as they had previously, I think we're going to see an increase of folks who come out with a significant substance use issue. I think on the anxiety front, folks with underlying mental health issues, whether it's a diagnosed anxiety disorder, we deal a lot with folks with borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder. You know, there are telehealth options, and some of those are listed in our resources section. We are seeing some treatment centers here in the US, particularly, that are still open and accepting patients, obviously trying to abide by CDC regulations. But there's no way to get around it that the amount of support for people with significant mental health issues is just less than it was before. You know, meeting a therapist twice a week online is very different than going into their office or going into a hospital setting for a few hours a day. So I think what we will see are folks who have been undertreated for a period of time and those symptoms emerging on the back end. I do think, I mean, I hate to be so cynical, I do think we will see rising divorce rates. I've talked to a couple of divorce attorneys who are saying even though people can't go to court, they're already putting papers together and filing. We've seen that within our client population, particularly folks who have lived, you know, relatively separate lives, that the amount of tension with everybody in the home is increasing. So those are some of the negative effects. You know, and I also, the last thing I will say is, you know, Fauci here in the US has been talking about long-term, should you even be shaking hands? And again, I had a particularly negative reaction to the idea that we never should hug or never shake hands as a practice, because I do think while we want to remain, you know, especially for the next, I think it's longer than people think, but for the next 18 months to 2 years, I think there will be significant trepidation about a lot of public displays of affection and certainly interactions that are very personal with people you don't know, including mass gatherings. I think long term, you know, there is a science behind the importance of human touch. And so I think already with young people, we're worried about interaction being solely technology based, and this is just going to increase that out of necessity. So I think those are some of the negatives. I think on the positive end of the spectrum, I think, you know, again, we certainly see some negative pieces of humanity, but I have to say here in the US, there's always an uplifting story about what people are doing for one another. I think there is simply a reality of people feeling more connected and people having the impression that that this world that we have lived in that's been largely self-reinforcing, meaning you're worried about your own concerns, your business's concerns, and your family, suddenly all of a sudden you're not able to get toilet paper, you're not able to do something that you had previously been able to depend on yourself to do, and you actually are required to help others and actually depend on others in a different way. So I think we may see a level of interdependentness that comes out of this that will be a positive. I don't think people will take health and safety for granted anymore. I think for those of us who live pretty active lives out in the world, I don't think any of us will go to a restaurant without kind of walking in and saying, thank you for being able to be here. So I do think we will see an increase in gratitude. I think economically, I mean, I'm not an economist, but I think the impact that we will see of small businesses closing and the challenges that that has on our economy will have an impact in the mental health sector. You will see people with rising rates of depression, rising rates, I hate to say it, but of things like domestic abuse and that kind of thing. So I think there are some hopeful spots, but I do think we will see in the mental health field a decrease. I do, one other positive, and this is sort of a technical one, at least here in the US, the telehealth options have been previously, there's been sort of a resistance of insurance companies to reimburse telehealth services. And that has been wiped away. And I don't see us going back to a system where now they're going to say, well, now that the restrictions are lifted, everyone has to go back in office. My guess is that will stay in place, which I think is a good option for people to have, particularly those who travel a lot or live in rural areas where just getting to a facility or getting to an office is not feasible.
That's great. Before we head into the Q&A portion of this webcast, first, a brief note about PEO Leadership from one of our members.
At PEO Leadership, I'm surrounded by other business leaders who challenge me to become better.
Les Mandelbaum, founder and CEO of Umbra.
Leaders really need to step outside their world and get new perspectives.
PEO Leadership is more than peer-to-peer advisory. It's a community of top executives with global experience.
Our retail landscape is rapidly changing. PEO Leadership has been vital in helping us navigate through this.
The time to step up and lead is now. Go to peo-leadership.com.
Thanks, Arden. We have a question here from Giovanni. Giovanni, do you want to come off the mute and ask the question to Arden?
Yeah, so I have a question in regards to communicating with children. Some children are of the age where they understand the implications, but there are some younger children out there, like 3, 4, 5 years old, that just don't comprehend what is going on. How would you recommend talking to them about it? Because, obviously they can't play on the playgrounds, they can't go with you to the grocery store, they can't see grandma and grandpa, parties are off the books, even though it's their birthday.
Yeah.
It's very different now for them.
For sure. And one of the resources, I think actually, and I'm happy to send this to you, that has actually some really helpful tips from Mass General about exactly how you work with kids. What we're seeing within our client population is, reinforcing the message of safety and health that, mommy and daddy need to make sure you're safe and you're healthy. And we want to make sure there are some people who are sick and we need to be careful and make sure that they get better too. So it's a lot of kind of normalizing it. I do think, it's certainly not making the virus into something very, very scary. I think a colleague actually suggested a book, and I am happy to send it to the group. I'm going to forget. I think it's called Mean Soup. I actually sent it to my nephew, who's a little bit older than 3 or 4, but it's basically a way for kids to sort of conceptualize putting all the bad things in the world and making a soup out of it. So I think it's drawing a lot of analogies where kids understand, or kids can comprehend that you're trying to keep them safe and that this is something that will pass, but also kind of making a fantasy out of it, if that makes sense. I think as kids get older, certainly there's other ways to talk about it. I do think the families that we have seen that have had the most success, especially with that age range, have been trying to maximize the things that they can do, whether that's getting outside, certainly being careful with social distancing, but even if they're out in the yard and they're seeing neighbors from far away, spending more times with pets, but kind of filling what activities they used to do, replacing it with things that are positive and that they can do. There's a ton of resources, both online and offline, that are available to families in this regard. And I think it's important I think the question is, if you don't replace it with the activities with anything, I think the anxiety increases. And the last thing I'll say, which is probably very self-evident, I think even children that are little pick up on the attitudes of their parents. So to the extent it's possible to remain calm, not expose kids to too much news, and not have a loop of CNN or whatever news source you go to in the background, I think that's important too. So I think to the extent it's possible, which I know is asking for, heroic feat, is to keep the the mainstream family environment as normalized as possible, replacing activities and keeping parents' spirits up so kids don't feel that negative energy, if that makes sense.
That's great. Thank you, Arden. I'm going to go to, I pronounced the name wrong, the last name, Al-Noor. There you go. Come on off.
Thanks, Leon. Yeah, this is a great, thanks so much, Arden. Great content here. I have a question for you around, as business leaders, we're making some tough decisions right now on temporary layoffs, on permanent layoffs, the right thing to do for the business. Mm-hmm. We provide support for those that are laid off. The ones that are left behind, there's going to be a certain amount of guilt, but we still need them to perform. We still need to get work done so we can continue to feed them and put food on the table and keep our businesses up and running. Any advice for us?
It's a great comment. So I will confess, I was not a Zoom or a FaceTime person prior to this virus. Like when people used to call me, I would roll my eyes when I saw a call come in on FaceTime. I do think this is a time for over communication, and to the extent it's possible, as much face-to-face as the company can endure. Because I do think, and I can say this, I run this small business, that's increased the amount of connectedness we've had. So we've seen, we're doing small things internally to try and keep morale up with our employees. And I sympathize with your position. So, one is checking in more regularly, supervisors really dedicating time to do check-in. I think supervision is something that people talk about doing weekly or bi-weekly, and it kind of gets in the midst of a lot of other work, it gets shoved to the sidelines. We do a monthly check-in that is not related to the business. So it used to be we would go out bowling. Now we're doing a version of like the show Cribs, where people show where they live and they bring their pets to try and get to know each other. We're sending very modest gifts to folks. I think it's like $80 a person, but there's a company called, I think, A Bowl Full of Comfort, which is soup and bread and cookies that we can send to folks' homes, because obviously, financially we want to be careful, but we're trying to say we're here to support your family systems. I think those are some of the things you can offer. I do think being sensitive to folks who either had some suspected anxiety or who are exhibiting symptoms like they're not performing the way they did, they seem distracted. I mean, some of that is just due to the realities of the way families are working today, but we are seeing cases of people who are very high performers that are almost like, if you think about anxiety, fight, flight, or freeze, that are in that freeze mode and they don't know what to do. So trying to identify those folks quickly and get them help in whatever way possible, whether that's connecting them with a therapist online, connecting them with a coach, trying to at least say, like, it looks like you're struggling. Is there something we can do? Here are the resources we know of. We sent out a template email to our staff. Here's how we're dealing with COVID internally. If you need help, here are some resources we're comfortable with. If you want to talk to your supervisor, we can provide you with others. And some of it is just, I hate to say it, but just being very sensitive to humans' various reactions. I have a particularly resilient personality. I've been through some medical struggles myself, so I follow all the regulations, but it's sort of like water off a duck's back is not the right way to say it. I'm not taking it lightly, but I don't read the news every day and worry. The flip side of that is there are folks who on our team who are almost crying every day, depending on both their personality and how much they're impacted. We have a bunch of employees in New York City, and they know people who have died in their family system. So it's a very different story. And trying to adjust expectations, this is, for us, it's a time everyone's remote. We certainly are all working on projects and expect updates, but am I hammering, my COO if he doesn't get no, I'm not. I'm being realistic that he has a child that wakes up from her naps, and his wife is an essential employee, and he's managing both on his own. So I don't know if those tips are helpful. We're doing actually one next week of an employer webinar with various tips for what they can do, but it's similar to what I'm talking about. I think it's on a basic level, it's just being human and trying to reach out, get help to the ones that look like they're really struggling, provide more general resources to the general population, and doing sort of small things to bring people together as much as possible. And I do find as leaders sometimes acknowledging, it gets back to that question, who do you want to be in this time? My goal with that, my goal personally is to try and do as little that I can on the layoff side. It may come to that. And if it does, I think giving people as much warning and as much and normalizing it for the group that this is really hard to do. It's not a position we ever wanted to be in. So
Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
So our next question is from David. Bring you online here. Talked about reframing.
There we go. Yeah, thanks very much. I'm really interested in the idea of helping my team and helping to coach on reframing techniques, and how do I have that conversation with my team about using some of these tools and techniques to help with this, combating this pervasive negativity that's out there, and helping them to use the tools that are available to help themselves to escape that negativity.
It's a great question. I've been on a series of webinars from professors at Harvard Business School who there's a couple different approaches. So I would say, one of them is sort of reframing this into a time that really tests our creativity. And for some people, that's going to be impossible to see. And it obviously depends on the specifics of your business model. But I've been amazed, even in Boston, there are restaurants that are fine dining establishments that all of a sudden are offering takeout. And that would never have been something on the radar screen. So if you can find small examples in your own community of companies and businesses that have managed to change their business model, alter it. I do think the closer to home those examples are, the more they resonate. And really trying to find even one or two champions internally of folks who are energized is maybe not the right word, but who are looking at this saying, this is a challenge and I think certain people have a creative problem solving mentality more than others. And certain people are naturally just a little bit more negative, a little more paranoid, and unfortunately this plays into it. And in certain cases, so I think if you can find a couple of those folks that are on the first category who are creative and looking at this, the webinar I attended talked about creating a task force internally of various leaders, multidisciplinary, that come from marketing, come from risk management, come from legal, to kind of talk through what are 3-month, 6-month, and 9-month goals that we can have in a variety of domains. So I think in my opinion, if you can it depends on the size of your company. So for us, that would be impossible. We're 15 people. The task force is the company. So, but what I did immediately, just as a specific example, most of our work, all of my marketing meetings are in person. They're speeches, they're sitting one-on-one with folks. And our work is primarily in person with clients. We're essential services here. We've been sort of designated that in the US, so we're allowed to still see people in person, but a lot of our work has moved remotely. Immediately when this happened, a group of us talked about, okay, how are we going to do marketing for the next 3 months if we can't go see people? So we've done a bunch of these calls, we've done some email campaigns. So some of it is, I think, also having a champion or a couple of what are projects we can do to feel proactive? Because I do think people having a sense of agency during this time and feeling like they're empowered to actually do projects, and that this kind of focuses their energy makes sense. The other, the practical pieces of advice I would have for employees in terms of anxiety, if somebody actually needs help and is constantly just, well, we're not going to get out of this, and is constantly worrying. I do think one of the benefits is the word anxiety has been stigmatized over time. We're just seeing right now, everybody is anxious. It sort of normalizes the fact that this is a pandemic. I think normalizes people getting help during it. So saying to folks, it's nothing to be ashamed of. You probably will need the help for a period of time, but whether that's therapy or whether that's some type of coaching or another resource you find in your community, I think that is a reasonable, I think it's a time where employers can be less concerned about hurting the person's feelings or overstepping bounds to suggest they need help. Another practical tip, and it's very hard to do, you can't control it because everybody's working remotely, but I think I've seen the best impact for folks who are not over consuming social media and news. So the best piece of advice I got on another webinar, everybody talks about meditation. I try to do it. I'm up to once a day for 15 minutes is about my bandwidth. But the best suggestion I got was, don't look at your phone first. Before you do anything, meditate, take a walk outside, yoga, whatever calms you, then get up, pour a cup of coffee, and then go to your emails and whatever else you need to do. and limiting, your news source to one or two sources and at designated times. I think for some people they're able to do that, for others they're not. But I think anxiety gets increased if they're seeing other businesses closing. I mean, frankly, watching a death toll increase doesn't, in my opinion, help anyone's mental health. And the last comment I would say is, again, and it gets back to the former one around supporting employees in general, I think if there are folks that are hit close to home with this, if this is in their family system, if they have a loved one who's on the front lines, a police officer in a shop, they work in a grocery store, whatever, to the extent you have that information, somebody who, either your HR person or somebody who has got a high degree of empathy, reaching out proactively and just saying, we know this may be impacting you in an outsized way than others. Is there anything we can do? I think employees right now want to be heard. They want to be acknowledged. And the last comment I'll say, and I think this one you want to tread lightly on because you don't want to look insensitive as a boss, but the gentleman, one of my professors on one of my webinars said, for those people who are sort of worried and constantly complaining, who are leaders, this is what leadership is. You went to business school to learn how to creatively solve problems and manage crises. So he sort of said, his words were basically like, buck up and this is your opportunity. And so for me, I actually respond very well to someone saying that, because I tend to be the person who has like a pity party for a period of time. And so I was sort of like, oh yeah, he's right. Okay, we gotta keep moving. And not always easy to maintain that attitude. I wouldn't use that with somebody who is sort of an entry-level employee in my team, but certainly with the folks that are leaders, I will sometimes say, like, I know it's hard and we're going to need to find ways through it. So I don't know if those are helpful, but.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Arden. I'm laughing because, well, they don't know you that well, but I've heard your full story, and you're probably the most resilient leader I've met, knowing what you've gone through and what you deal with. Please keep the questions coming. Arden, I'm going to ask you a question, maybe change the direction a bit. We've got the holidays here. A number of us have parents still around. With these holidays, and I'll use a personal example, I notice my family members going through their mood swings are massive. And yesterday, for example, being on a call where a family member said, I will not join, if we got Passover coming up, the Seder, I will not join the Zoom call, which is totally outrageous. Or unheard of for somebody who's really enjoyed the family. You've worked with a lot of families. I'm sure you've seen different things here. Are there any things that you can do with these parents to sort of keep them? Yeah. They're in these small homes too, a lot of them, right? They're in condo. They've downsized.
Sure. So very hard with older people. A member of my team, her mother-in-law just died from COVID, complications from COVID, basically. And nobody was in, she has 4 children and nobody was in the room with her. It just tragic story. So I think, I think that is the population that's the toughest, is sort of the older population. I'd say a couple things. With someone saying, I'm not going to join a Zoom call, I think being understanding about that, having the person who has the most emotional sway is maybe the wrong word, but the best emotional relationship with that person, reaching out and saying, we're concerned. We're not going to judge. If you really don't want to do it, we understand. I don't think this is the time to try and pressure people into doing, something they're not comfortable with, but just trying to be there, even if the person doesn't like Zoom, or if they're whatever, doing a phone call and proactively saying, we're here. If you change your mind up to the last minute, someone will call you. Maybe you record the Zoom call and you send them a recording after. We've been doing internally a lot of gifts. We're doing with employees, I mentioned, but my mother is sending like chocolates. We have a favorite chocolate store in Boston that eventually closed down, but we're also big fans of a place called Fran's in Seattle, and they send great sea salt chocolate. So she's sending them to people we know are homebound. My grandmother, and a lot of stores in that department are still open. So doing small gifts to acknowledge somebody. I do think this is a time to go back to old school letter writing. Maybe it's sending a picture of the person. So trying to connect in other ways, acknowledging how hard it is for somebody who, wants to celebrate a certain way and that's not possible. We are seeing, and it's been in the news here, but I actually have, my grandmother we have a family friend that actually goes and visits my grandmother in her assisted living facility. So she's going to go outside the window and wave to her today and drop off some items with the front desk. So, you know, we're seeing, I just saw a news story with somebody whose wife is in the hospital for cancer, and he's across the street with these huge signs of "I love you." So trying to be creative about how you can be present. You know, it is very hard. I think the reason I say that I wouldn't pressure people is because I think it comes back to everybody having different tolerance levels for a pandemic like this, different fear levels, and, you know, different levels of frustration at what they can and can't do. And so I think being sensitive and not ignoring the person, but really trying to find a way to keep them connected, even if it is not the way that the rest of the group wants to be connected. You know, practically speaking, I've heard families doing very creative, whether they get takeout from a restaurant with 4 of them. You know, my aunt celebrated a birthday of her husband the other day. They made a whole meal at home, took the meal to the beach, sat in their car, didn't go on the beach, but just looked at the ocean at a private beach where it wasn't restricted yet. And then drove around their small neighborhood and looked at pretty homes. I mean, it's very kind of basic tasks that you can do. And, but a lot of it is about trying to fill time creatively for folks. But the elderly population, I think it's very, very challenging, partially because they're also just not as technology savvy. So my dad's family, he's one of 10. He's Irish, surprise, surprise, O'Connor, I'm Irish Catholic. So they are on his weekly Zoom call. And my mother tells me all the time, like, I hate it. I don't like the way I look on it. I don't know if I'm talking and somebody else is talking. So, you know, for folks that are not technology savvy, this is testing every ounce of anxiety they have, and very, like, what she gets anxious about, I'm sort of like, really, these are the things you're worried about? But for her, it's real, and it actually makes her nervous to go on the Zoom call. So I've said to her, but maybe you do one and you don't do all of them, and you send everybody a note, or you send, you know, it's really trying to adjust. I don't know if that makes sense, but trying to adjust to what people's communication preferences are. And I find with people who don't like big group texts, like I call an aunt of mine who would never be able to do a Zoom call, and she's got some dementia, she's got some medical issues. I spend 5 minutes on the phone, and she's just so thankful that I called. Now, she probably doesn't remember it the next day, but it's a small thing that you can do to those who are isolated.
Yeah. I actually, on the same note, probably, and this probably applies to a number of us in here as well, and I'll ask the question on behalf of the member here, but this situation is where the parents live far away. Mm-hmm. They live together, mother has Alzheimer's, and the dad is the primary giver. And so really the concern is that the dad has no more outlets for sane conversations. As you know, used to go out and volunteer and participate in the community, today is stuck in the house with someone who often probably forgets him as well. Any tips there on what they should be doing or looking out?
And is he the one who's resistant to the Zoom call, or is this a different?
No, this is a different question from somebody in the group.
Got it. That's somebody, I think, to the extent, I don't know how many siblings are in the support network or how many nieces and nephews, but to the extent people could even aim for, if not daily, multiple times per week, people reaching out for a half hour, like, let's do a Zoom lunch together. Let's do an evening or morning coffee together, but more connectedness. If he can actually use Zoom, I would say just for the face-to-face contact, I think it could be a huge relief. So this is a very different example, but we're seeing an uptick in families who want to do Zoom sessions, who have special needs children in the home, autism, other developmental disabilities, and these children may have been in some kind of day program, but now they're all in the home with other children, and parents are freaking out. So, and in some circumstances, they don't want us in the home. So we will do a Zoom call in the morning and a Zoom call in the evening, and it kind of just brings the level of concern down. I also think, in addition to actually dedicating time to connect or via Zoom, you know, like in a concentrated period of time, sending that person, whether he watches funny DVDs, Netflix shows. I mean, I think for folks like that, I found for me, like, remaining connected to friends, you know, who are saying, okay, have you finished this season of Ozarks, or, you know, have you watched this? I've had people Zoom a TV show with me. So being creative to try and help him feel connected, I think, is really, really important. And it's ideal if it can be long and you can have a long conversation, but I find even people connecting for 15 minutes over a cup of coffee can help just the person to feel like they're not completely isolated. The last thing, and this is really dependent on where you are and if rescues are running, I don't know if he has a pet. I'm finding that pets are having a huge impact on our client population. I actually know people who are trying to foster pets or even have purchased pets during this time. Not feasible for everybody, and certainly I'm a dog lover. I actually had my dogs removed for this session because I was worried they would be barking and all over the place. Certainly not something to do if you think after COVID-19, you're not going to be able to take care of it. But if it's something you were considering anyway, it's not a bad time to look at it because for me and for my parents and for others, they provide such a sense of solace and enjoyment. And even if it's we have a few rescues here in Boston open that you can foster puppies or dogs with. So again, it's just a thought. The only last thing I would say is, trying to ask him what brings him joy. So there are some virtual volunteer opportunities. It's of course not the same as going to the local nursing home, but if somebody in the family can ask him, did he ever enjoy things that we actually can do now? Did he enjoy cooking? Did he enjoy art? Is there a musical instrument that he liked? Does he have, I don't want to presume, but does he need someone to get him the musical instrument sent to him? The US is obsessed with exercise, so you can't buy a Peloton bike to save your life. But I know a lot of other people who have taken up knitting and needlepoint and things that they can do around the home. And that's provided a sense of productivity. It's also helped, with calming somebody's nerves. Music is a big, if he happens to be musically inclined, I have a family friend who's sending me live operas and different musical events that you can actually tune into live on a daily basis. And some of those resources are also in the slides.
That's great. Thanks, Arden, for that. We've got another question. Ron, we'll take it back into the business side. Ron, you've got a question about entrepreneurs.
Hi, Arden. I'm working with some entrepreneurs that I'm working for a bank and I'm helping them cope with their cash flow situations. Some of them are very resilient, like you mentioned. Some of your clients actually look at this as a challenge, the COVID-19 pandemic. But I have many of them that are afraid they're going to lose their business. And for them, it's like I'm trying to prevent them from stepping off that ledge. And I'm doing the best I can as a non-professional when it comes to mental health. I'm there to help them with their cash flow, but really I'm listening to them pour out their hearts to me. And as empathetic as I trying to be, it's hard for even me to cope with.
I can understand that. Well, I included a couple of Canadian specific resources. There's one resource in the slides called eHome Counseling that I just found out doesn't offer services in Canada, which is unfortunate. I think, and I didn't have enough time before this presentation to Google. I'm sure there are some online telehealth options. I actually think there might be a couple listed in the governmental website that I put out. My suggestion, given your position and your role, I think being sensitive and certainly listening and saying, look, I can completely understand how nervous you are, normalizing it. Everybody is going through a certain level of panic. But I do think in those situations, suggesting to the person that they seek support. So we do a bunch of coaching. There's all sorts of different coaching platforms that people can do. I know folks are really nervous right now, especially if financially their business is up in the air. I think, the question is like, do I engage in this? Can I afford to do that? There are some we're doing a free anxiety support group that is on our website, but there's oodles and oodles of other virtual support groups. I do think that my best suggestion would be to try and get them to get support for some of these other issues. And it's not to say you can't be an ear for them, but the reality is if they, if panic is all that's absorbing them and they're not able to productively actually manage their anxiety, they're not going to be any help to their employees or to the family, to their family. So it's really about trying to get some of those symptoms under control as much as possible and get them, some people respond to breathing techniques, some people respond to meditation. and some people kind of will stick in this, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to do nothing phase. Those are the hardest, I'll be honest. When we have clients who are stuck in the status quo, those are the ones that take the most prodding. But my suggestion really would be to try and route them to some sort of professional resource to just say, it's not that I don't want to hear, I do, but I want to make sure you're in the best position to run this company. And my sense is that if you're not able to manage some of this nervousness and anxiety, it could have negative long-term effects. The only other thing I can think of, and I don't know if you have I don't know what the equivalent group in your particular area would be, but we have all sorts of support groups for companies of all various sizes, YPO and EO being the biggest ones, entrepreneurs organizations for smaller and YPO for the bigger. I think if they can join some kind of virtual support group for now with other entrepreneurs, it could be helpful. It could be a bunch of entrepreneurs all expressing their anxiety, but my guess is they may learn some best practices. So that is another avenue to try and consider. I would say they could listen to webinars or read books about managing through crisis, but my sense is, just by the way you're describing them, they're probably people that don't even have the focus to be able to do that now. And so my goal, if I were in your shoes, would get them to have some kind of alliance with some type of coach, therapist, or a community, so they can air their fears and hear how others are reacting and hopefully take some action steps from that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, that's great. If there are no more questions, I think I've gotten to all our questions here. Oh, no, I've got one more here, Arden. You can't leave us yet. Alan, can you come off and come onto the mic here?
Yes, hi. Actually, it's Marla. Alan, good morning.
Hi, Marla.
Thanks for putting this on. And I apologize, I missed the first few minutes of this, and you may have answered this question, but relative to those associates or employees that we think may be experiencing some heightened symptoms of anxiety. So other than being able to see that through their performance, what other questions could we coach our managers to ask their employees when they're connecting with them regularly? And what kind of human questions should they ask? What should they be listening for?
I think, I think trying to get a sense of how are you faring? How is your family faring, to the extent they can get a sense of if the person has a support network, they may already know this information. Are they married? Do they have children in the home? Are the kids being homeschooled? I think the ones to really look out for, where to be concerned or to have just a heightened level of sensitivity, are those that are, I'd say, two categories: two parents both working remotely with kids that need to be homeschooled. That's very challenging, because usually the traditional resources, at least nannies and babysitters and in-laws, all of those things are usually right now pretty restricted. The other category to be concerned about are people that have children, partners on the front line. So medical personnel, essential employees that they're supporting. So trying to get a sense of the dynamic within the home, I think that's one piece. I think other questions are like, have you been able to sleep? Do you feel like you're able to balance your work life with your home life? I don't know that you're going to ask in a casual way as a manager, are you eating regularly? Some of it depends on your level of rapport with the person. But if those are the things that we're looking at for symptoms of anxiety are, certainly there's red flags like shortness of breath, a lot of headaches, those kinds of things. So if somebody said, yes, I'm really struggling with sleep, then it may be, are you having symptoms that you're concerned about? That, you may go down a different line of questioning. But if you're just talking about more generic questions, it would be kind of basic ADLs. Are you able to get outside? Are you able to exercise? You're able to do your normal routines within, obviously with some adjustments given what we're facing. But that's what I would be looking at. And then I'd be looking at, obviously, significant performance issues being off. So those are the main ones that I'd be concerned about. And then sensitivity towards those who are in a category where either they have somebody impacted in their family, or there's a heightened risk within their family system for the issue coming forward.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you all, but a special thank you, Arden, for joining us today from Boston. It's always a pleasure to have you and host you. Perhaps soon we'll have you back in Toronto. We'll actually do this live, or maybe we could, or maybe we got to be 2 meters apart. But I do look forward to seeing you again shortly. Thank you all for participating. The call has been recorded today. The slides are in the recorder. It'll be posted on our PEO Leadership COVID-19 resource page. So if you'd like to see the recording or grab the slides, you'll have access to that later today. And on there, I think Arden is your contact information as well. So people can directly reach out to you. So thank you all again for joining us today. It's nice seeing everybody. I wish everybody, if you're celebrating Passover, happy Passover. And for those celebrating Easter, I wish you a happy Easter, a great weekend.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Arden.
Thank you.